The major driver for change was the lack of profitability in the farm production system. So I'll give you an example. In our farming rotation, we had winter crops, and then we'd have a bare fallow or a long fallow into a summer crop. In our case, it was usually sorghum. So to get there, you went from harvesting a winter crop in November to not planting another crop till the following September, October. So almost 12 months.
So bare fallow means your paddock is empty.
It's empty. It's got nothing growing in it, and that was a way apparently to try and store more moisture in that paddock.
Does it work?
Well, it does until it's full, but I think you lose life out of the paddock while you're doing it, and you end up with a lot of passes of chemical over those fields to keep them clean of weeds.
When you say passes, what do you mean?
Passes in with spray rigs, basically. So applying chemical to those fields. We'd start in probably December with the first knockdown, and then you'd have another one in January or February, and then another one in March, April, June, July, just to control the weeds.
That's purely killing.
That's purely killing, yeah. Glyphosate mainly, with other additives, depending on what you were trying to target at the time. But glyphosate was the basis. Now, when we started chemical knockdown kills of what we were doing, we used to use rates of 400 mils to 500 mils at a time. By the time I finished, we were using 1.5 litres to 2 litres a hectare. So it had quadrupled the amount of usage, and the strength had gone up as well. So we were spending a lot of money on chemical inputs to kill things. So then we'd get to September and we'd do a spray in front of the planter, and so that's an extra one.
Okay.
So then we'd plant it, and after we planted it before the crop emerged, we'd do another spray to lay down a chemical to control the weeds that may come up while the crop's growing.
So we've got 7 passes
so far. And then you'd more than likely have to put another one out that may have even needed some inter-row cleaning up of weeds, so in between the rows of the stuff that you had planted. And then more than likely a grub spray at the other end.
That's 9. So you have sown your seed?
You've sown the seed.
Okay. So by some miraculous deliverance, your seeds germinated? And
you can get pretty good crops. So look, in that time, my mindset was all about production. I thought producing as much as I possibly could led to more profit. But we were spending all this money getting to that point in spray. So we also had fertiliser to go down at that point too. So we were putting nitrogen fertiliser down.
10.
And at planting time, there's probably a starter fertiliser going as well.
11.
Yeah.
So roughly every time you were sowing a crop, to get from start to finish, you had to make 11 passes.
For that crop.
For that one crop. And that is over 12 months?
Yeah, and you wouldn't harvest that until the following February, March. So that was the next opportunity that you had something else to do with it.
Okay. And so just labour alone, that's extraordinary. How does that compare then with the regenerative way?
Well, if you can ignore what's growing in your paddock, and if I'm thinking now about trying to work with my soil and what I've got, I'd be trying to leave living plants in those fallows for probably as long as I could until I wanted to turn them off. And that may be with glyphosate, or it may be with crimping. If I was to do it now, my preference would be to put a roller crimper over it, probably a month to 6 weeks before I was having an opportunity to plant it.
And what does that do?
A roller crimper flattens the existing plant life onto the ground, and it's a chevron shape so that it crimps the stem and stops the photosynthetic process from happening. So it's a bit of a juggling act to get enough weight on it to push it onto the ground. It also supplies an armour, I suppose, over over the ground.
So you are killing it, but because you're laying it flat, it's helping to retain moisture.
Yeah, so you're transferring it from a living plant to basically a humic covering on the ground. It's organic matter. Yeah.
Okay. And then you've crimped it. So what do you do next?
Put a planter through it.
Okay, so you're seeding.
Now I'm using trying to use multi-species of plants depending on what I want to do with it, whether it's warm season or cool season. And now I'm not really concerned with harvesting them, so I'm going to graze it with animals.
So that's where you're getting your cash flow.
Yeah, that's my interest, and that's where I want to trade. Is in those animals.
Okay, so you've done 2 passes. Do you need to put any fertiliser down?
No, I choose not to.
Alright. So your plants are still growing?
Yeah, well they are. It's seasonal. We're trying to incorporate legumes to pull nitrogen out of the air, using the natural sequence of rhizobium and trying to look after the biology to help us along.
So now you've got your plants, they're up to height, however high you'd like them to be. What do you do?
We graze them with animals. My preference has been cattle, but sheep aren't out of the question. And we do it in a way that we try and graze a third, leave a third and lay a third down on the ground to provide a bit more armour. We do try and do small sections at a time if we can, and make sure we leave some covering behind us. I try and have enough feed in front of me so that I know that I can take the animals that I've got there up to a next level, which is a marketable point. So if it doesn't rain again, at least we can turn them off, and we're not putting any more pressure on our ground. Now, in a cropping sense, that's not always that easy to do, especially if you're cash cropping. So you'd need to be running it, trying to run a harvester over it. And but look, there's more ways to get around that than just harvesting it.
But you can, once you've traded your cattle or your sheep, so you've grazed it, you've taken them off, you've now got a really well fertilised open paddock space to
go again,
like straight away.
Yeah,
we're in this country where you can farm both seasons, can't you?
Yeah, if you look, you may not get it just depends on how you see it. So by not spending any money, you're not putting at risk, so you don't have to have as much cash flow to turn that into a profit. And you do have a winter and a summer season up here. We're lucky. We get rainfall in both seasons, so there are plants that will grow in both. And if you put them in the soil and you get some rain to help you along, they'll grow, and you can go through and graze them.
So you could put another cover crop or multi-species crop in. You could do a monoculture. There's endless possibilities.
We haven't thought of them all yet.
Yeah, okay. But with that regenerative way, you've actually only made 2 passes.
Yeah, and look, you could do nothing and still graze the paddock. It's just my choice that I'm trying to lift what's in my soil by adding more plants to it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm trying to give it more life. I'm trying to bring more diversity to what's there originally, and hopefully we'll get it strong enough that we won't have to keep planting it, that the perennials will take over and we can just graze those.
So this is, you could run a cash crop, but this is predominantly pasture.
Yeah, I want it for grazing.
Yeah.
I don't want to be worried too much about it. I want to sell, I want to think about it as whatever I've got in my paddocks I could take off and consume them myself if I chose to.